All right. This is Chris Kowalczyk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an ESL instructor. Been teaching English to non-native speakers since 2007. And this podcast is mainly for my current or former students, but of course, anyone's welcome to listen. And I lived abroad in Japan for about 6 years, and of course, I studied before that, studied Japanese before that. So I bring a lot of that experience into my discussions, and of course, into the classroom. And I'm currently, and basically for most of my career, I've been based in the LA Orange County area. So, what I wanted to talk about today was kind of inspired by a recent conversation I had with a student. So, the student was, or seems to be, kind of struggling with actually having opportunities to use English in real life situations, and of course to study. I mean, studying, and you can study anytime, but I think study in a more meaningful way, something that's closer to real life, right? And it got me thinking, and we were having a pretty long conversation, and it got me thinking about my own experience about 21 years ago when I first moved to Japan, so 2004, and how the technology was very different, of course, but also my own circumstances. So this student does not have a lot of opportunities to interact with people in English, it seems like, because of their job as well. They're kind of home a lot, and they don't have a lot of access to transportation. And of course, that's a big problem here in the LA Orange County area. For most areas, or most cities in this Southern California area, if you don't have a car, it's really tough. And of course, you can get Uber, but that can get expensive, right? I mean, having a car itself is expensive, but actually, when you think about it, having a car is pretty expensive if you think about the maintenance, the insurance, and the gas. So using Uber once in a while, yes, you're paying, let's say, $20 for a trip, right? But when you think about it, unless you're doing that every day, you're not paying for all the problems all the responsibilities you have as a car owner. So anyway, that's a different topic. But so the conversation with the student kind of got me thinking. Now, actually a long time ago, about 12, 11 years ago, I had an idea to create a like studying English guide. So maybe I'll restart that idea some other time. But I got a lot of stuff happening in my life right now. So I'm trying to keep things a little simple, but yeah, maybe I should do that. But anyway, getting to the idea of, well, this conversation I had with this student. So it got me thinking, well, if I were in Japan now, not 2004, but 2025, with the new technology that we have now, I'm talking like ChatGPT, Google Translate, smartphones, high speed internet, things like that. Got me thinking, if I moved to Japan now, or if I was somebody from Japan or another country moving to the US at this time, specifically LA Orange County area, what would I do? Right? So it got me thinking about that stuff. So I think the first thing I would say is, if you're studying English, like let's say you're studying English in your free time and you live in the Orange County area, I gotta ask you, why are you studying at that time, right? When you could be going out and using English. I think that's the first thing you might want to ask yourself. So what I'm saying is, like, I know a lot of students, they have these apps on their phones, or they review their English, their notebooks from ESL classes, or they read the textbook or whatever in their free time, right? But I want you to ask yourself, why are you using that time to study? Could you be using that time to use English in a more meaningful or communicative way? What I mean is, could you be going out and talking to people? Could you be reading a book? Well, I guess that's kind of studying. I guess what I'm trying to say, and it kind of gets to a later point, but what I often see is I see students working very hard on the studying aspect of English, but they are rarely actually using English in communicative situations. Now, it doesn't always mean speaking. It could be listening. It could be reading or writing. But I see, and I did this too when I was in Japan. Well, actually, I didn't really do it that much, but again, what I see is a lot of students working very hard on the studying aspect of English. But you gotta ask yourself, could you be communicating more in English? So it doesn't have to be speaking. It could be reading. So are you actually reading any books in English? Magazines? Are you actually watching TV in English or listening to the radio or podcasts? Are you listening to people around you? When you're out, are you paying attention to the people around you? Are you writing emails? Are you writing in a journal? I don't know. I'm kind of getting off track already, but the point is, I want you to ask yourself again, why are you studying? Is it because it feels safe? Is it because it feels rewarding? Because, you play these games, these English apps, English learning apps, and you feel like you did something, but then you feel like, well, my English actually isn't improving that much, right? Or are you studying grammar, 2 hours a day, but you never talk to anybody? So you got to ask yourself, why are you using this time for studying? Is it a good use of your time? Or should you be actually communicating with people? You can think of exercise, right? So, maybe somebody spends a lot of time walking, right? And you say, okay, that's fine. That's good for exercise, but is that the best use of your time? Should you be doing strength training instead? Maybe that's more valuable than doing cardiovascular exercise. It's the same thing at your job, right? I mean, sometimes people spend a lot of time working on something that actually doesn't really yield much results. Maybe because it's more rewarding, maybe because it's easier or safer than taking a bigger risk. I don't know. But ask yourself that. Am I really using my time well? When I'm studying grammar for 2 hours, is that really the best use of my time? Or could I use that time for something more productive or meaningful? The thing is, when you are interacting with people, and it doesn't have to be talking, right? I mean, it could just be being outside. When you're out there in the real world, as we say, outside of your house, right? Or apartment, whatever, talking to people, hearing conversations around you, excuse me, going to the mall and just listening to people, right? Reading signs at the supermarket or walking around the city and seeing a lot of different signs and walking into random stores. What you're going to find is when you're in these so-called real life situations, you're creating, yes, it is uncomfortable sometimes, but it's also exciting. And these challenges are what's going to motivate you, hopefully, I think so, is going to motivate you to study harder, right? So a lot of times when you're like, okay, I'm going to sit down and study for 2 hours, right? I mean, you're going to fall asleep. You're going to be checking your phone for text messages. You're going to be, looking at YouTube videos online, not focusing. I don't know. You have to really force yourself to study, right? It's very abstract. There's really no communicative aspect. But when you're out there, it really forces you to think, well, I need to improve this. My English is not good enough in this area. But it might also reward you and say, hey, I did a pretty good job today. I didn't understand everything, but I understood 50%. And that's better than, last year. And you're excited, you're motivated. You say, hey, this store is really interesting. I want to come back to this store. You go to the farmer's market, right? So I'm not going to go to the supermarket. I'm going to go to the farmer's market. There's more conversations. When I'm buying things, I can talk to those vendors, the people selling things. You get that fresh air. You're looking at the packages, and what I would call it is a positive feedback loop, right? You're doing something interesting or challenging or feels real, right? Motivates you. I say, I didn't understand this. When I was talking to this person, I didn't understand everything. I think I need to work harder on my listening. And so it kind of hopefully motivates you to study harder, gives you some more things to think about, and it just gets you out of the house. And I think that's one of the most important things. And also changes your routine too. So not just getting out of the house itself, because sometimes people just do the same thing every day, right? Also changing your routine, going to a different store, going to the farmer's market when you usually just go to the supermarket. going to the beach and just kind of walking around, listening to the people hanging out at the beach, getting a taco from the taco stand, and just, again, listening to conversations around you, maybe talking to somebody. That's possible. I mean, I usually talk to one or two people at the beach when I go there and walk around. Yes, I'm taking my dog, so maybe people talk to me because I have my dog, but there's a lot of things you can do. So something to think about there. You got to take notes on everything. So that's what I would have done, or that's what I used to do. That's what I did in Japan, is I always took notes. I had a little notebook with me, a pocket notebook, and I had a larger notebook. Now, the thing is with ChatGPT these days, or Google Translate or these software, what a lot of students will do is they'll like hold their phone over the text and it'll automatically translate, right? That kind of AR or augmented reality. Or they'll, speak. They'll ask someone to speak into the phone and it'll translate. Or they'll just, manually input the word and look it up on Google Translate or whatever, ChatGPT. Or they'll ask a question to ChatGPT and they'll get the answer, right? That's all great. Here's one of the biggest problems I see. Most of the students I talk to are not taking notes. So they're getting the answer, they're getting the translation, they're getting the definition, whatever, and then it's gone, right? They don't save it. They don't make a note. A few students do. I'm not saying everybody, but most of the students I see using the software are not taking notes. So you got to do that. Okay, that's what I did with my notebook, because I had a paper dictionary and I had to write everything down. But everything, whenever I went out, I would see some sign in Japanese and I would write that. Well, I don't know what this means. I'd write it down, or I'd take a picture and then, ask somebody later. But I was always writing down notes. So if you are using all the software, that's great, but you got to make a note of it. Now, you could make a note in your phone. That's fine. But I think most people aren't doing that. So make sure you do that. That's what I would be doing, right? And you're basically taking every opportunity to learn that you can. Now, I don't know if this is a problem in American culture, but I remember in Japan, I would always ask staff at a store if they said something I didn't understand. I would say, could you repeat that? And then I would write it down. I would tell them, I'm learning Japanese. I'm studying Japanese. Could you say that again? Could you write that down for me? Because, the Japanese writing system can be quite difficult with the kanji or the Chinese characters. So sometimes I could hear the word, but I didn't know how to write it down. I think most people in the U.S., at least a lot of people in the Southern California, LA area, LA Orange County area, I think they would, now you don't want to have a 30-minute lesson with them, but I think they would be happy to write down one or two words that they used or to repeat themselves, especially if you say you're still studying English. I think a lot of people would be happy to help you, as long as you're not asking 30 questions. But you just got to take every opportunity and you got to write down those notes, right? Another thing to think about is, what is your goal, right? What is your specific language goal? So for me in Japan, my goal was just to be able to talk to people about, everyday things. I wasn't really too concerned with slang. I just wanted to have like fairly normal conversations, maybe talk about politics a little bit, things that are happening in the world, social issues. And I guess I wanted to just have the same conversation ability in Japan that I was able to have here in the U.S. But I was not too concerned about slang, to be honest. So I didn't really focus on that. I didn't need it for my career because as an English teacher in Japan, if I had zero Japanese, I would be okay. I would still have a good job, or the same job, I should say. I didn't really need Japanese to advance in my career, or really just a little bit of Japanese. So that was my goal, right? What is your language learning goal? Because again, I know some students will spend hours and hours, focusing on grammar, right? When they don't even have the communication skill to talk to their neighbors, like, slang and idioms and phrasal verbs and, everyday conversation. So you got to think, what is your goal? Is your goal to work in the medical field, right? So then you should be studying a lot of medical vocabulary if you want to maybe enter a nursing program or something like that. So again, you got to think about these things, right? And if your goal is just a general English communication ability, that's fine too. So don't spend 90% of your time on grammar, because that's not going to help you a lot. You got to be learning more vocabulary, and more than just studying English, right? You got to study cultural stuff, pop culture. So if you're only studying English but you don't watch any English language videos like YouTube or TV, or if you don't know what's happening, you know, in American pop culture, that's also going to affect your communication. So what I mean by that is, when I was studying Japanese, I was also learning Japanese through pop culture, TV shows, movies, music. I didn't not much social media, at the time, because I started. I mean, we're talking like since I was a little kid. My mom's from Japan, if you don't know, so I did watch a lot of like Japanese cartoons when I was a kid. But what I'm saying is, you could. So if I'm watching British TV, for example, I can understand pretty much everything they're saying, but I'm going to have a hard time really understanding what they're talking about, because they're going to be talking a lot about things that are only in the UK. Politics of the UK government, singers who aren't world famous. They're only famous in the UK. A lot of local issues, right? Local culture. So even here in the United States, I mean, if I go to New York, there's a lot of things I may not be able to communicate about, even though we're speaking the same language and we're in the same country. So you also have to remember, a lot of your learning is not just language; it has to be part of the pop culture as well, and what's happening in the country, but also locally too, not just in the U.S., but locally in the city you live in or in the area, L.A., Orange County, Southern California, something like that. And so that's something I did when I was in Japan. I tried to watch the news every day, and I watched news TV shows that I was interested in. I didn't watch everything. I just watched the ones that I liked. Sometimes you got to spend money. I mentioned Uber. So, maybe you don't have a car in the LA or Orange County area, and, so you say, well, I want to go do volunteer work. I want to go to the farmer's market. I want to go to the beach or whatever. You want to go do these things, but you say, well, I don't have a car. And we know that the bus system in Southern California is really not good. We don't really have much of a train system either. Sometimes you just got to spend that money. You got to spend that money on that Uber or taxi. You don't want to do it every day, but if your options are stay home all weekend and study English by yourself, watch TV, or option B is to spend some money on Uber, but to go to the beach and spend half of the day at the beach, you got to spend that money. If you just stay home all day trying to save money, I think you're going to regret it. Now, I'm not saying spend $500 to take a Uber to, San Diego from Los Angeles, but, spend that $20-$30 to go to the beach. Not every day, but again, maybe on the weekend. Get out of the house, get out of the apartment. When I was in Japan, I rarely stayed in my apartment. I had a dog and a cat. I still have my dog. The cat I took to Japan, he passed away. We're talking like 15 years ago when I was, living there. I still have my dog. I have another cat. But, yeah, pretty much every day I tried to stay out of the apartment. And, maybe on a lazy day, I might spend the morning in the apartment. But generally, I was trying to stay out. Of course, I always spent the night at my apartment because I'm not going to leave my pets alone. But I was really, and I got to admit, I was in Tokyo, so it's a little bit different. I understand if you're in the suburbs, there's not much to do outside. But this kind of brings me to my next point. If you're going to study, go to a cafe, go to a restaurant, go to a park where there's a lot of people. Go to a cafe at the beach, heck, even go to a library, right? Get out of your apartment. That's just this is all my perspective. I'm not saying this is going to work for everybody, but I think the more you get out, the more opportunities you create for conversation and meaningful communication, and also just to get more motivated. Let me give you an example. So you go to the library to study instead of studying at home or your apartment, right? You go to the library, just the library, right? And then, you say hi to some of the staff. You don't have to have a 5-minute conversation, but you can have a short conversation with them. There's people around you talking a little bit. I know it's a library, but people can still talk. You can talk to some of the staff. You walk around, look at some of the books, and then you say, you know what? I'm kind of hungry now, right? Or I want a snack. So you go to maybe a boba cafe nearby. I mention that because from my hometown where the library is, there's a little like eating area nearby with boba and restaurants and stuff. So then you go to a boba cafe and you do a little more studying, and maybe you talk to the staff a little bit there. And then maybe you kind of walk around that downtown area. And I mention that again because next to the library in my hometown, there is like a downtown area right next to the library. Really nice little area. So you just start walking around, you look in the stores, and you're staying out of the house. You're seeing all these different signs. You're hearing people talk. Maybe you talk to one of the store owners. Just for like a minute conversation. You're looking at some things and you say, I want to come back here, right? Just getting out of that apartment or house, I think, is key. Even if it's just going out to study, right? Volunteer work is always great. I recommend volunteermatch.org. But, if you go to church, for example, they may have some volunteer stuff there. But yeah, you can find volunteer work very easily on the internet. Do something you're interested in. I did some volunteer work in Japan, working with animals and like homeless people, food, organizing food banks. So you can do things like that. Volunteer work is a great way to make conversation with people. You only have to go once a week, once a month. You can go for 1 hour a month, 2 hours a month. You can have conversations with people. Maybe you make friends, maybe you don't, but you can still have conversations. I used to talk to people all the time when I did volunteer work. I met an ex-girlfriend there. She was not my ex-girlfriend at the time. We became boyfriend, girlfriend, and then, now she's my ex. But you see what I'm trying to say. And it was great, and it was fun, and I was getting out of the house, right? When I had some free time. And when you're having conversations with people, you don't expect to have a long conversation all the time. Sometimes it's just going to be 30 seconds. Sometimes it could be 10 minutes. It just really depends on the situation. But don't have the expectation that every conversation needs to be long. It could just be, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. Maybe that's it. Maybe it becomes a 20-minute conversation. Maybe this person, you go on a date with this person. That happens. That happened to me a few times, right? I've gone on a few dates just because I had a random conversation. But don't be afraid to just talk to people, even if it's just short. And sometimes they don't want to talk to you, and, as long as you can read their face, read their tone, if they don't want to talk to you and that's pretty clear, then don't continue the conversation. But if you never talk to anybody, that you're losing a lot of opportunities. Because I really think, like, for example, compared to Japan, where people usually don't want to talk to strangers, I think in the LA and Orange County area, Southern California, I think a lot of people are pretty open to a conversation. I have conversations with my neighbors all the time. Sometimes it's just a hello. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes it's 10 minutes. We're not like good friends, but I get a lot of good information. I learn about things. I enjoy it. Sometimes if I'm really bored, maybe, I've been home for 3 or 4 hours taking care of my animals or working at home. Then I see my neighbor. I might talk for 5 minutes and kind of wakes my brain up. It makes me feel good. Of course, you can call your friend, but, if you call your friend, you're probably not using English, right? So just some things to think about. Yesterday I talked with someone at the supermarket. He was bagging my groceries, and I mentioned the baseball game, Dodgers game, and he said, well, I don't have time to watch because I'm really busy with school. And I said, oh, what are you studying? And he said, well, I'm trying to get into the nursing program, but I live, the school is very far away, so I'm driving a lot. It's a lot of gas money. And I said, well, you know what? I think nursing is really going to pay off for you because, it's a very in-demand job and, make pretty good money. And, he said, thank you. And, I think the conversation was just a couple minutes, but, that was nice. Can't do that in Japan for the most part, because I tried doing that in Japan, and it's just a different culture, for better or worse. So definitely take that opportunity, or take advantage of that opportunity here in the U.S. Or I think most English speaking cultures, I think, tend to be open to conversations, um, compared to maybe like in Japan, where usually they don't want to talk to strangers too much. So anyway, anything else there? Attending events. So if you don't want to do volunteer work, just try to attend some events. Maybe you're interested in surfing. Well, why don't you take a surfing class as well? You can talk to people there, or you can attend a surfing event. Maybe there's a competition. If you like to listen to jazz music, well, stop listening to music at home. Go to a live concert. Maybe you'll talk to somebody there. Maybe you won't, but you're going to get out of the house. You're going to be going to the concert, and maybe you're going to walk around the downtown area after. Maybe you talk to someone, maybe you don't, right? But again, you're getting out of the house. You're hearing real English from the people around you, even if you're not talking to them, right? If you don't understand something, take notes, right? You can talk to the bartender, the server, even if it's just for a couple minutes. You got to create these opportunities. So what am I trying to say here? I want to wrap this up. Get out of the house or the apartment. I think that's very key. Even if it just means that you're going to study outside, that's fine. Why are you studying? So are you studying to avoid actually using English in real situations? I mean, I think that happens a lot. I understand that. But I think you need to ask yourself, could I be using this opportunity or this time to actually talk to people? Make sure that you're studying, whatever you're studying, make sure that's actually related to your language goal. So if you're spending 90% of your time on grammar, but your goal is to, just be able to talk to people, it's not going to help you much, right? You got to use your time for other things. You don't have to be perfect either. I'll say that. There's a lot of people whose English proficiency is quite low, but they have a lot of friends, who are native English speakers. They talk all the time. And I think because, and this was my final point. It's actually the topic of another episode, but English is my native language, right? So when you're talking to me, I know that as a non-native speaker, you probably want to get everything right. You want to get your grammar right. You want to use the right vocab and so on. But you have to remember that English is my first language. This is a language I think in primarily, right? So you're looking at English as a subject to study. But for me, English is not anything I need to study. It's not a subject. English is the way my brain works, right? This is my thoughts and emotions are all in English. So don't see English, this is my recommendation, don't see English as something to study. See English as maybe like the key or the tool to understand me, to communicate with me. Remember, English is a language. It's a tool for communication. That's all it is. You want to get to know me. You want to learn about my ideas. You want to get closer to me. You want to get information. English is that tool. It's that key. It's not something just to study. So I think we need to get out of that mindset as well, right? It's not something abstract, okay? It is my first language. And I mentioned this because I think I got into trouble with this in Japan as well, where, maybe sometimes I would focus too much on Japanese as like a subject, right, that I need to study. When it's just the first language for all these people, including my family members in Japan, my relatives, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, and so on. My nephews and not my nephews, but my second cousins and so on. So, it creates a bit of a distance there. But if I'm just trying to get to know you, I want to learn about you, I want to know what you're thinking, I want to know what your opinion is, then the language just becomes a tool to get closer or to get that information. I hope that makes sense. It's not just something to study, right? And I think a lot of times, maybe this is my last point, but I always say it, worksheets and grammar books and textbooks, it's going to help you learn English, but that is not the goal, right? The goal is not to pass a test, right? Oh, I got 100% on this test. Great. That's not the goal. All of this is just so that you can communicate better with people, right? Whether that means reading information or writing an email or talking to your neighbor or understanding an IRS document, right? passing a grammar test is not the goal. Pronouncing a word perfectly is not the goal. The only goal, really, is to communicate better, whether that's reading, writing, listening, or speaking. Everything else is just a tool to get you to that point. Now, I will say one more thing, but I know that for some people, studying itself is enjoyable. I did enjoy studying Japanese. Like, just actually studying was also fun for me. But language is communication, right? It's not a worksheet. It's not a textbook. It's not a test, right? Language is just communication. So keep that in mind. And if you're staying home all weekend and just studying at home all weekend, I'm going to say that's probably a waste of your time. Or it feels like you're being productive, but it's like a boxer who never actually boxes, right? Or fights. It's like a boxer who's always training and never actually fights. Or maybe they fight once a year and they train, you know what I'm trying to say, right? So you're just training and training and training and training and you never actually fight, okay? So maybe think about it that way. I'm going to wrap it up here. If you're watching or listening on YouTube, leave a questions or comment or a suggestion. And I have a bunch of topics for future episodes, but you can always recommend one as well.